Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spice of Life podcast. And for our Spotify listeners, that was The Time Warp from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is a true classic and one of our favourite movies of all time, which will be played as part of the Halloween festivities at our Theatre of the Week on the 30th of October. And it looks like it's going to be an incredible night. So our Theatre of the Week this week is director Mark Bell from episode 3's favourite theatre. And coming up in a few weeks, we have got the theatre's manager and programmer, Ali Wolf, in a fabulous conversation.
We're so excited, aren't we?
We are. So, Mike, why don't you tell us, what is our theatre of the week?
Our theatre of the week this week is the Clapham Grand. Hey! So this is another one of those theatres like Wilton's that had such a rich history, and it's had such a varied history, which is quite ironic because obviously, you know, it's famous for being a variety theatre. So let's have a little look at the history of the Clapham Grand. So it was built by a consortium led by our very good friend of the show, Mr. Dan Leno.
Oh, fabulous.
His name comes up all the time. And he was part of a group that decided to build a theatre. And principally, Dan Leno wanted to build this theatre because he wanted to provide a venue in Battersea, which is where he was from, which is where he was based. And that's now where the Clapham Grand is based. It's in St. John's, which is in Clapham Junction. And it opened in 1900. And it was opened as the new Grand Theatre of Varieties. So it was one of the first purpose-built theatres for variety entertainment and for the likes of Dan Leno. On his doorstep, because I mean, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? If you were one of the biggest stars in the world, it's like, I don't want to travel. I want it on my doorstep.
No commute.
So when it first opened, it had a capacity of 3,000 people, which you think is such a massive number. But then you think music hall and variety of the time was obviously so popular, and I just think it would take no time to fill that in those days.
And they wouldn't have built it if they didn't think that it could meet capacity.
Exactly. Now, interestingly enough, one of the original managers of the theatre, a man named Walter Gibbons, actually was so inspired by the Clapham Grand that he went on and decided to build a theatre of his own. It was a little innocuous place, a little hole in the wall, you know, a little dive down the street, and it became known as the London Palladium.
Oh my gosh. So that was based on the Clapham Grand.
He was so inspired by the fact that this theatre had been built that he went and built his own on a whim, and it became the London Palladium. So dream big, kids, dream big is the message of that story.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because we have a fantastic guest coming up in a couple of weeks, and he was at the London Palladium in the 40s.
He was.
And he's got some fantastic stories about that venue.
He was. We can't wait for you guys to hear a little bit more about that. So like I say, when it opened in 1900, it was known as the New Grand Theatre of Varieties. And then in 1927, it just became the Grand Theatre. And in 1927, it changed to become the Grand Theatre because it started to incorporate cinema into the theatre, which obviously is a pattern that we've come across a lot in our research when we've been doing our show. It's the basis of our show, Twice Nightly. It was a common thing to happen amongst theatres of the time as they incorporated cinema. But the Grand still made sure that they featured live entertainment as well. You know, they quite passionately believed that there was a place for theatre and for live cinema. And it seemed to work well until 1950, when it became a fully fledged cinema. Obviously, by that time, variety was kind of fading out a little bit. Television was coming in. Films were big. So 1950, it became a fully fledged cinema. And it became known as the Esoldo Cinema because it was purchased by the chain Esoldo Cinemas. So it stayed like that for 13 years, and it eventually closed in August in 1963. And then in October 1963, it became the Esoldo Bingo Club, and it became a bingo hall. Again, it's one of those things, if you look at the history of a lot of theatres at the time, that was a really common pattern, wasn't it? That they would be cinemas and then they became bingo halls.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting about that is that if you go on to the Clapham Grand's website as it is now, they have a mixture of live shows, cinema, and bingo. So you can do all three now still.
Exactly. Isn't it funny the way everything comes back around? It's like, again, it's that circle of life thing, isn't it? So it stayed as a bingo hall until 1979. It changed names a few times over the years, but it did remain a bingo hall until 1979. And then it closed for 10 years. For 10 years, it was completely empty. Nobody used it. It was a derelict building, basically. And then in 1989, it was purchased by the Mean Fiddler Group, which turned it into a live music venue.
What does the Mean Fiddler do? Like, just elbow you with its fiddle arm? Spank you with its stick.
Elbows you out the way at a concert, like get into the front, just Mean Fiddler just pokes you out the way. So during that time, in that 10 years when it was taken over by the Mean Fiddler Group, elbow and everybody out the way, it was completely refurbished, it was completely redecorated, and it was turned into the venue that we know it to be now.
Well, he doesn't sound mean at all. He sounds like a fabulous fiddler.
No, it's a complete oxymoron, isn't it? The Mean Fiddler was actually a saint, an absolute saint. Now, unfortunately, at the time, back in the 90s, this music venue wasn't that successful. Like, it didn't go down well, really, and it closed in 1997. It collapsed. You know, the idea of it as a music venue just collapsed completely. And then it was bought by the arch villains of life. It was bought by Wetherspoons.
No!
Yes, and there were plans for the theatre to be turned into a Wetherspoons, which obviously would be a very, very tragic, unfortunate thing.
I feel like we should insert some terrifying music.
Some awful thunder and lightning sound effects. But then, who should swoop in and try and save the theatre? Is it Batman and Robin? Is it Superman? Is it the Avengers? No, it's not. It is Corin and Vanessa Redgrave.
Oh.
The Redgraves,
who also would look fabulous in Lycra.
Wouldn't they just? So the Redgraves stepped in and they actively campaigned for it to be restored to its original purpose. They actively campaigned for it to become a theatre again and a place for live entertainment. So there was a big, big ongoing battle between the Redgraves and Wetherspoons, which is like, you know, that Ryan Murphy series, Feud, Betty versus Joan.
Yeah.
It's something like the other one, Redgraves versus Wetherspoons.
Send it to Ryan as a script and see what he does with it.
Now, Wetherspoons absolutely refused to back down. They refused to give in. They refused to sell it. But luckily, as fate would have it, they were refused a license.
Oh.
So fate stepped in and did the Redgraves work for them. So luckily, it didn't become a Wetherspoons, and it was able to continue as a live music venue, which it still is today. The reintroduction of live music and live entertainment picked back up. And now, I mean, it's a massive, massive home to loads and loads of different areas of entertainment. It's a big, big place for comedians. Like you said, they have Bongo's Bingo there. They have music acts. I mean, everyone from Oasis to Chuck Berry. I mean, Susie and the Banshees to the Venga Boys. Like, everybody has been there. I mean, if that's not a hotbed of variety, what is?
Exactly.
You know?
And what I love about the venue, and we've chatted with Ali Wolf, who is the producer at the venue, and he will be coming on the podcast in a few weeks, is just how accessible it is. If you go on, you know, ticket prices are very accessible, and people of all ages go there. It's not just a place for, you know, people who love variety that are of a certain age.
No, not at all.
You know, students go, you can have a good drink, you can have a good dance, and it is just an absolute party venue, which is what it was set out to be, what Dan Leno wanted.
And it's a great place to showcase new talents as well. George Ezra and Rag and Bowman started their careers there.
Fabulous. Amazing.
As well as not just a showcase for music acts, but also it's a massive, massive home, the Clapham Grand, for the LGBTQ plus community. And they regularly host pride events. They showcase some of the world's most fabulous drag queens. Again, it's so accessible, it's so fun, and it really captures that traditional spirit of variety in a modern way, which is exactly what we want, isn't it? You know, when we think of variety theatre and music hall, we think of it as an old fashioned thing. We think of it as a part of history, whereas it's not. It's still really relevant in society now and part of entertainment now.
Absolutely. Well, thank God for Vanessa Redgrave.
Thank God for the Redgraves, honestly. So like you say, they still regularly host movie nights. They have club nights. They've got bingo. And like we said, that strange kind of twist of fate, that circle of life thing of it all, now is used for all the purposes that it was originally used for. And even when it changed over history, when it became a bingo hall, now it's still a bingo hall, but in a fabulous way. Isn't that great?
I love it. Thank you to director Mark Bell for flagging up this theatre as his favourite theatre, because that's why we've delved into it a little bit more today.
It's been absolutely fantastic. And if anyone would like more information, they've got more articles and facts on the official Clapham Grand website, which is claphamgrand.com. So visit that if you'd like to know any more about this beautiful venue.
So to end the show, in honour of the Clapham Grand being a place of one of the hotspots for variety theatre now in 2021, we are going to have the cast of the UK RuPaul's Drag Race playing us out. And you can see these queens at various points over the coming season at the Clapham Grand. So all that's left for us to say is...
See you next week!